Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. The Outdoor Adventure Series celebrates individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, and access and enjoyment of the great outdoors. Our guest today on the Outdoor Adventure Series is William Bradley. Brad is a retired co-founder of NIC, a technology solutions company. He is the owner and president of Little Osage Ranch and the president and co-founder of FarmTender, LLC. Now, I met Brad at the Outdoor Writers Association of America, our conference in Casper, Wyoming this past May. Brad sat on a panel discussion where we spoke about the topic of regenerative agriculture and ecosystem and wildlife conservation. And I thought, that's a really interesting topic. And so Brad was gracious enough to accept my invitation to appear on the podcast. And so, Brad, welcome.
Well, here we are, aren't we?
And so
Thank
here
you.
we are. Fantastic. Now I have to ask, where are you located?
I'm in the Kansas City area.
Okay. I think
Yeah.
I've been to Kansas City once, and I know it's known for a lot of things besides baseball and football. Oh,
Barbecue.
barbecue.
We were
Okay.
just named one of the 16 host cities for the 2026 World Cup.
Oh, wow.
So we have a surprisingly large and vibrant soccer fan community here.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And so we met at the OWAA's conference in Casper. And before we get into that, and I'd love to hear about the invitation, the why, but could you share a little bit about your background for our listeners?
Certainly. I grew up on a farm south of Lawrence, Kansas, which is the home of the University of Kansas, and did all the normal farm things. We had cattle, hogs, row crops, grain crops, and lots of hay. So we did all of that, soybeans. So throughout my high school years, then ended up attending the University of Kansas, swearing I would never be a farmer. Got out of law school and had married a girl from Western Kansas. So we moved about halfway across the state to be closer to her family. And I had 9 very interesting and rewarding years of practice in a town of about 38,000 people that served a large trade area of maybe a couple 100,000 people. And then I was persuaded to move to Wichita, Kansas, and practiced there for 6 years with a business boutique firm, slightly larger. This was the 1980s into the early 90s, and there was a savings and loan crisis was going on. There was a farm crisis going on, lots and lots of farm bankruptcies, resolution trust corporation, and so forth. So I did a lot of trial work, and I also did a lot of commercial lending work, which ended up being a lot of bankruptcy work. So I got very deeply involved in bankruptcy law, but in my spare time, I had gotten an idea for a business. And so I worked on that for several years, and it took 6 years to get it really going. And here in Kansas, and then the end of about 7 years, I left law practice to join that business.
Okay.
And I was with them for 21 years. We grew from a very small operation in one state to have a presence in 35 states, I think, and a few federal agencies. So if you think of your state website, let me use Kansas as an example, kansas.gov. We built that site. We built most of the applications behind it, and we manage it under a long-term contract for the state of Kansas that gets rebid every so often. So we did that for 30 or 35 states and a few federal agencies at the time I retired. And that was about 7 years ago.
Okay.
I retired in order to do other things that I was finding very interesting, like regenerative agriculture, farming, conservation work, and so forth.
Okay. I'm just going to circle back just a little bit as you
Sure.
described this firm and the work that you were doing in state contracts. It reminds me of a firm I used to work for, or actually 2, Electronic Data Systems, Ross Perot's company. because they had
EDS,
the
yes,
state Medicaid agencies. They were the
right.
fiscal agent, and that's how I got started. Now I say I'm a recovering IT business consultant. But when you were chatting about that, and then I was preparing the background notes, I was thinking, probably a company doing very similar kinds of work in a way that an
Yes,
EDS would do.
the thing about our business model was we were not paid by the state. We were paid by user fees on the state websites. And
Okay.
because of the user fees, we were able to it generated enough money that we could also build a lot of things for free. So many of the commercial applications had a fee. Many of the personal individual person type applications that we built did not have a fee.
Okay.
And then in 1999, we went public. So that was a lot of fun, but also a lot of work.
Sure. I can imagine. Now, you mentioned a couple of years ago, you said goodbye to that life, and I suspect once growing up a farmer on a farm, once a farmer, always a farmer. How did you decide to go back into farm life and the subject of regenerative agriculture? How did that start to come into the forefront of your thoughts and what you wanted to do next?
Well, I used to say I had a lot of hobbies, and then I bought a farm,
Ah,
and that pretty much wiped all of them out except for the farm. No, I had sworn that I didn't like farming. I was never going back. I was also going to move away from Kansas City, which I did briefly, and then here I am back in this area. But yeah, I got back into farming through hunting,
ah,
and I had a couple of co-founders with me. There were four of us total, and we each brought something different to the company. So we were a pretty good team altogether, but a couple of them were pretty avid hunters. And I had hunted small game when I was growing up. They didn't have deer back then in Kansas. And so you couldn't really hunt deer and there weren't any birds to speak of around where I lived. So I didn't do much bird hunting, but I was away from it for about 30 years. And then my co-founders, in two of them, invited me to go hunting with them. I thought it was fun. So I started doing more of it. But they used to take me sometimes to a place south of Kansas City that was mowed like a park. And I just thought this was the strangest place to have animals that you could imagine because there didn't seem to be any decent habitat. And the guy who owned it didn't seem to be very interested in habitat. So at the time, I was newly married and actually looking for something to do on the weekends. And so my kids were all grown. So I bought a farm and
ah,
it was not a very big place. And then one thing led to another. And over the next 10 years, I acquired more acres. And my brother, one of my brothers, I have four brothers, he had stayed and run our family farm. And he'd become more ecologically minded and he got involved in some programs, conferences and things that were teaching a different style of agriculture, mostly around grazing. So I went to one of those and that led me to a conference about crops and different cropping systems and what I had grown up with. And this seemed to just make a lot of sense to me. So the deeper I got into it, the more interesting it became. And one thing led to another. And so I told him, the farmer who was farming my land, we're going to do this. And then he was angry to begin with and worried. And then he got on the internet and started researching the type of agriculture I was talking about. Then he got intrigued and curious. And so we did it and he grumbled for a couple of years, but now he's an advocate. He loves it. It's working for him. He agrees with it because we're working with nature instead of against nature. And I find that very refreshing. So
okay.
having taken 3 years, that's what led me to decide that we should have a matching service for farmers who wanted to farm regeneratively and landowners who wanted regenerative farmers.